Hello and welcome to Talking About Books. My name is Robert Jaquay. I'm the director at the Town Library in Colonie, and
I'm Richard Naylor. I'm the assistant director here at the library.
And we hope you enjoy our discussion about Edith Wharton's Age of Innocence. And we're talking about this book as a part of a program called The Big Read, which is sponsored nationally by the National Endowment for the Arts and locally by the Upper Hudson Library System, with a significant sponsorship from the Writers Institute.
And also WMHT and the Albany Institute for History and Arts.
And the whole concept was to have people read the same book and get together and discuss the book, and also to engage themselves in programs that come from the book, whether it be a tour, which there have been 2 of them, or the film that was made out of the book, or other exciting things that have some sort of attachment to Edith Wharton, her world, and the Age of Innocence.
And the basis of the whole thing was a recognition through studies and statistics that people in general over the country are not reading as much as they used to. Too much television perhaps, or perhaps something else. But the number of people reading good literature seems to have dwindled somewhat. And this is an opportunity for us to bring a wonderful book to life and let us all see how much fun and enjoyment we can get out of really good literature.
Gives us a chance to also approach works of literature that perhaps we wouldn't have picked up otherwise. I know I knew about the Age of Innocence, and yeah, I saw the movie when it first came out, but I never thought I'd ever find myself reading this book.
And that's really what it's all about. Last year I had the same situation with Their Eyes Are Watching God. I never would have read that book, and now I can say I love that book.
Now, one of the things that we'd hope for is if someone who's watching today hasn't read the book, they certainly will be encouraged to do so. And for those people who have in fact read the book, maybe our discussion will probe some of those areas they haven't been able to discuss on their own. So we don't want to necessarily reveal too much. We want to give the basic sort of essence of the book and talk about the significance of the book and the structure of the book. I don't think there's any real secrets in it, but we're not going to do any spoilers here.
We're not going to read the whole thing.
That's right.
But the language and the story is very deep, and some people who've read it 4 times have just fallen completely in love with it. So reading it once is almost irrelevant, except that you really enjoy it. And reading it 2 or 3 times, you really come to love it.
Now, I'm going to dare say this because, I mean, it's something that I think because of associations that people could believe, and that is that many people might think of this as a woman's book, which is an unfortunate classification because it was written by a woman. It has a certain feminist quality to it. And if you ask women who've read this book about this book, it is clearly a book that they love dearly. And yet it has a universal appeal because also the main character, the character that really is throughout this whole book, is a man, okay?
Absolutely. And I know we can say that probably more women like this book in a really strong way than men. But the main character is a male, and certainly the dilemmas and the information and the enjoyment is universal.
One of the things is in approaching Edith Wharton, and it's really, you find out the more you read, and one of the nice things that we've done here is that we've not only concentrated at the town library, not only concentrated on the Age of Innocence, but we've created a whole series that gets us involved with other works that preceded this and works that follow this. And I guess you see the evolution of the author, you see some commonalities, some main themes that are consistent. And someone might approach a work of Edith Wharton and be sort of put off by the language because it is maybe florid. It's not the way we speak today, certainly. And yet, like other great works of art and literature, once you get yourself into the rhythm of it, it's not an issue at all. And especially in Age of Innocence, I think there's something particularly different about this. She had achieved a style of writing that was more concise, and the language just flows, and it's right on with what's happening in the book.
Absolutely. I guess to lay the groundwork, we should look at the setting of the book.
Yes.
And that's very important in Edith Wharton, in all of her books. This one, though, to the nth degree, because it was suggested to her that she should write about what she knows. And I think it was Henry James who said that to her. Write what you know. Don't try to make up something in another world. And this world she knew inside and out. As you reminded me earlier, some people objected to the book in the beginning when she was about to get awarded the Pulitzer.
Right.
That it was too historical.
That it was too autobiographical.
Too exact. So what is it? It's about New York culture in the 1870s, but not everybody's New York. This is the upper crust of New York. The very wealthiest, people who feel that their family name is more important than anything, and that makes them also more important. And then it's about the struggles taking place as that order, the old order, started to be, you could say, break down, or perhaps it was being challenged by new ideas.
New ideas and disillusion. I mean, it's a transition because you have a society that's very, very structured. It's very exact. I mean, there are definitely rules that everyone need to comply with. And if you were daring to break out of that, and that's a significant theme here, you could be the scourge of that particular society.
You might be sent away just as if you were shunned in some primitive culture.
Or, God forbid, not invited to dinner.
Almost the same thing. Really.
So we're talking about 1870s
The
New York.
1870s, right.
Okay, kind of a golden era in New York. And I guess trying to envision the city at that particular point in time. And one of the things that Wharton does do is not only does she capture the people and the era, but the place.
And I guess it's impossible for us without a picture, or at least a map, to imagine what New York would have been like in the 1870s, because all we know are buildings from the upper, well, from Westchester practically, all the way down to the tip of Manhattan. But in the 1870s, when this book took place, one of the characters builds a home just south of Central Park. And they refer to this house as out in the...
There's nothing around it,
There's
is
nothing
there?
around it, no. There's homes, there are no big buildings, nothing's taller than the church tower. And
I think there's a wonderful
pretty
picture
different.
that's shown in one of the editions of the book.
Right.
Which was, I mean, that's how it looked. And cow pastures, right?
Cow pastures, right.
And people were moving around with carriages, and horses were going through the streets. And we don't get a sense of, we don't get any of the really dirty stuff because these people don't go to dirty places.
No.
And if they do, they don't look, do they?
No, and where they go, where they say that it's kind of borderline, it just means that maybe an artist lives there, but it's certainly not the upper crust.
Yes, the Bohemians, which we'll talk a little bit more about, the Bohemians versus. So, okay, we've set the place and we've set the time, and I'm just going to go into this point in time because the book starts in a very interesting way, in a way which also prompted one of our programs here, because we have most of the characters, a large part of the character cast, going to or being at the opera. Okay, and it's the Academy of Music, and there's a performance of Faust, and very interestingly, it's a place to be seen, not necessarily a place to go and listen to the opera, say for a few moments, and they could show up at any given time or at a particular time when they thought it would be a favorite moment, or after they had done certainly other things, and then it was also the bridge between what they were doing before, and obviously a dinner afterwards. In fact, one of the main characters rises up at a certain point in time, and everybody knew that this was about an hour and a half later they would be going to X's house for dinner.
Right. So we thought we would start, and this will run through our little talk, read a section of the book, just a short paragraph or a few sentences, to give a flavor, and we'll try to illustrate several through lines of the book using the text and then a little discussion.
Excellent.
So shall I do the first one?
Absolutely do.
And this one takes place when the main character, Newland Archer, he's come into the opera and he's entering his box. When Newland Archer opened the door at the back of the club box, the curtain had just gone up on the garden scene. There was no reason why the young man should not have come earlier, for he had dined at 7, alone with his mother and sister, and had lingered afterward over a cigar in the Gothic library, with glazed black walnut bookcases and finial-topped chairs, which was the only room in the house where Mrs. Archer allowed smoking. But in the first place, New York was a metropolis, and perfectly aware that in metropolises it was not the thing to arrive early at the opera. And what was or was not the thing played a part as important in Newland Archer's New York as the inscrutable totem terrors that had ruled the destinies of his forefathers thousands of years ago. Now, the second reason for his delay was a personal one. He had dawdled over his cigar because he was at heart a dilettante, and thinking over a pleasure to come often gave him a subtler satisfaction than its realization.
Excellent, excellent. Certainly sets the scene, and it also introduces us to the main character, dare we say, the main character?
I would say.
Newland Archer. And things that happen in the book are what Newland Archer perceives, what happens to him. So it's his point of view.
And this woman's book is all through either Newland Archer's thoughts or his dialogue. Of course, he has a dialogue and we hear what the other person is saying, or a little bit of the author's narrative, but it's mostly from his point of view.
So Newland Archer. Now, the aspect of dilettante. I know we had this conversation before. You envision a man who is what?
Well, dilettante, I had to look it up, has to do with not really taking anything really seriously in terms of going in and learning all about it. He tended to be somewhat, I guess, superficial in what he did. So let's say he wouldn't have gotten into music where he learned every composer and was totally interested in the music, but in the idea of the music, he would have been sitting and smoking his cigar, thinking about going to hear the music. And if we push that to maybe his professional life, it's unlikely that he would become president of the United States. He might think about what it would be like to be president of the United States. or in a relationship, what it would be like to be with a person. And that is really the crux of this novel.
Yeah, the whole idea of what's inside Newland Archer's head, this whole idea of reality and appearance. And I think we get terrific insights into a significant conflict. Subtle, but serious, and really motivates this character.
So here we had the two things. Let's review them. First of all, it's the social customs. It was not the thing, and the social customs rule. I guess we'll just stop right there, as we say today. Social customs rule, and also his personality, his dilettantism, his dream nature.
But as you get introduced to the whole environment at the opera, you also see that this is not his alone. I mean, clearly there is a posturing and a way to be whenever you're out in public, whenever you're with your friends. And I often wonder how really close anyone is in this particular book.
I think we can wonder that in the world.
Yeah.
You know, you go through life with someone, and how close is everybody really?
Now, at the opera, there's this whole activity going on where Newland and others are using little opera glasses, and they're looking into an opera box, and they're looking at everybody actually, and you land upon a woman by the name of May, okay, who is one of the main significant characters in the book, and May is soon to be, or at the brink of being, betrothed to Newland Archer. This is his wife, okay? And there's a whole discussion or feeling of what being married is like, or what it would be like. I mean, you have this character that you've depicted already, this dilettante, and society, of course, it's really expected that you're going to marry in your class, okay, class distinction, marry the right woman, and there's a place for women, okay? And this whole idea about innocence, which is something that people struggle with about the title, but the innocent or the child woman is very, very appealing, okay? Because they won't challenge, they're going to have their role, and he can be his self. May happens to be very beautiful, and I think she's depicted as with a purity, because one of the symbols in the book that's attached to May are lilies of the valley. Okay, so he's looking on her, and on stage in the opera, we're seeing all the stuff going on in Faust, and at one point in time, Newland is looking at her, and he basically says, "The darling," thought Newland Archer, his glance flirting back to the young girl with the lilies of the valley. "She doesn't even guess what it's all about." And he contemplated her absorbed young face with a thrill of possessorship in which pride in his own masculine initiation was mingled with a tender reverence for her abysmal purity. "We'll read Faust together by the Italian lakes," he thought, somewhat hazily confusing the scene of his projected honeymoon with the masterpieces of literature which it would be his manly privilege to reveal to his bride. It was only that afternoon that May Welland had let him guess that she cared, parenthetically, New York's consecrated phrase of maiden avowal. And already his imagination, leaping ahead of his engagement ring, the betrothal kiss, and the march from Lohengrin, pictured her at his side in some scene of old European witchery. He did not in the least wish the future Mrs. Newland Archer to be a simpleton. He meant her, thanks to his enlightening companionship, to develop a social tact and readiness of wit, enabling her to hold her own with the most popular married women of the younger set, in which it was the recognized custom to attract masculine homage while playing discouraging it.
So now we have his idea of what May is like. And that really brings out the fact that he is naive as well as a dreamer.
Yes, and it's interesting that you say the word naive, because when you talk about the book, you talk about Newland Archer, and we had a recent book discussion about him. Many people don't really call him naive, and a lot of people don't particularly like him. But I think that the naivete is truly a quality of his, and I found him an endearing character. And in many ways, I was rooting for him throughout the book. So.
I was too, but he's young here. And I think if we roll back the ages, we're all naive to some extent. I mean, otherwise, what would we be learning as we get older? In terms of women, though, he hadn't been married before. He'd had one other experience that we know of in the book, which was with a married woman. And that really helps make this a feminist novel, or appeal to women, because we see the hypocrisy of society and the unequal treatment. In much of what you read, there was this unequal
Absolutely.
image.
Well, there was her place. I mean, he could hope that perhaps he could do this, but in the reality, it would be like, should I dare say it, talking to an empty shell?
Right.
And I think the significant thing, if we haven't stated already, is that Newland Archer lives in his head. He imagines what things would be like. This is a character defect, if you want to say that. He imagines it. It becomes very romanticized, and then, of course, he has the real world out there that's really indicating to him it's not going to happen. Not in this setting, anyway. And that's why I think it's significant when we, in the same opera box, okay, at that same performance, his eyes land on another woman.
Ellen. Olenska.
Who is actually a countess, right?
She could have been a Welland, but she married a Polish count, very wealthy, dissipated character who gambled, chased other women.
Was a brute.
Period. You got it. And so she returns from Europe rather than stay married. Well, she stayed married, but rather than stay in this life where he would do whatever he wanted, and I suppose he didn't care what she did either, but she certainly wasn't feeling fulfilled.
And there you have, in close proximity, a juxtaposition, women, type of woman. You have the betrothed, and then you have this sort of exotic woman. And he knew Ellen, right?
They played together as children.
They played together as children. But here she comes back, and there's this sort of beauty in her different. She was right away, you could picture her as different from May. And I would say at that point in time, the match had been struck as far as his feelings for Ellen and also his feelings for May. He becomes split.
I think it's an interesting statement because you've got to put the match somewhere, I suppose, but it's really hard in the book to know for sure exactly how this develops. I think it's an important point, but we don't really know exactly in his soul what it is that's attracting him to her. We can only surmise. We can only surmise.
And when I started to say beauty, I hesitated because I think you get a it actually talks about it somewhere a little later on here, that her beauty isn't really what's attracting him.
Because his wife, his betrothed at this point, is certainly beautiful.
Is beautiful.
She's tall, she's athletic, she rides horses well, she shoots arrows and always wins every contest.
And by the way, his weren't the only eyes on her.
No, everybody's
Okay.
was on her.
Okay. So difference all of a sudden comes into this very structured, very ordered world.
And that's really where the attraction must lie. There's something different about the personality. In order to build up Newland a little bit, the next little section I wanted to read, it gives you another side of Newland. We just heard about how he looks at women as pure, they need to learn, they're sheltered. He would enlighten her and make her the equal to everyone in Manhattan. But then he has another idea about how women should be treated. And this is expressed because Ellen is in trouble in a way.
Yes.
And I guess that's important to mention.
It is.
Because, okay, she comes back, but she's still married, and she wants to be divorced. Divorce is not looked upon as the thing. It's not in good taste. And taste is everything in this society. So people want her to be talked out of it.
There's a stigma attached
There's
to
a
Ellen.
stigma. And if she really was suffering, too bad, that would say. So here is what Newland goes through when he's thinking about Ellen, what she was going through with the Count, and should she be able to be divorced? Now, the secretary, I should explain quickly, she ran away from the husband with the help of his secretary.
Right.
And right now, Newland is having a conversation with an elderly gentleman who knows all about everybody in New York. He is the encyclopedia of the upper crust. And he says, the elderly man says, "You say the secretary merely helped her get away, my dear fellow. Well, he was still helping her a year later then, for somebody met him living at Lausanne together." Newland reddened. Living together? Well, why not? Who had the right to make her life over if she hadn't? I'm sick of the hypocrisy that would bury alive a woman of her age if her husband prefers to live with harlots. He stopped and turned away angrily to light his cigar. Women ought to be free as we are, he declared, making a discovery of which he was too irritated to measure the terrific consequences. Women should be equal.
Exactly, and you know, this is definitely Wharton coming out in Newland Archer, right?
Right.
And here we have a man who is a feminist, you know, and the idea
At least the idea that's emerged.
because this whole notion of marrying May and sort of perpetuating the routine, is really ho-hum to him. And to have this exoticized woman, this bohemian character, and somehow he attaches himself, not somehow, he attaches himself to her because in his own heart, he wants to be more like her.
You know,
He wants to really be free himself from the societal constraints he's in.
And then we could say, why? And as you said that, the answer, maybe one answer came to me that, well, who is he? He's probably more than the dreamer. He has real needs, real emotions. He's a sexual being. And he can't live the real life simply in the clouds. So he does have real feelings. And maybe that's the tension, the emotion, the feeling, the desire on the one hand, and how does he reconcile that with the thing and good taste and the family?
One of the, I think, the brilliant things about this book is that there's a lot that's not said. You're given clues as to thoughts, and you're given descriptions of people. You're giving scenes being set, but you don't get a lot of detail. So you, the reader, are left to fill in the blanks or surmise. We're not given answers to many of the questions that we have. We can't find them anyway. We can just see some of the results, how it eventually carries it through. And I think this is one of the tantalizing aspects of this book, that we're provoked to muse, to in fact put ourselves in their place, in spite of the fact that it's 1870, in spite of the fact that it's a social class that most of us look at and perhaps would possibly admire, and really put ourselves in, because these are everyday issues, and they're being talked about, but they're not being fully explained. And I just think that's just a wonderful, wonderful
and they're basic
aspect of this book.
human issues. They're not idealistic questions. They're things that everyone deals with all the time. Relationships with spouses, desire, structure, family. How do you maintain what you want versus what everybody else wants?
And one of the things that Newland does often, first of all, we have to also say that Newland is a reader. Okay, maybe you already mentioned this. Newland's a reader, and he doesn't read just anything. He really reads very, very, he has a diverse taste, okay? He reads poetry, he reads history, he reads, I suppose, philosophy as well. And I think that his world of books is a way for him to step out of the world he's inhabiting. And he also is a character that likes to be alone at times. And I think as the book progresses, we get this feeling that he's deprived of that, and he is actually being suffocated by, the presence of others. And one of the earlier scenes, after all the stuff starts to starts to simmer inside of him, he goes back to his residence. And by the way, he's living on a separate floor in his mother's house. This is prior to his marriage. And he comes into the room, and he's thinking about all these things. And he thinks about marriage, okay? And as he dropped into his armchair near the fire, his eyes rested on a large photograph of May Welland, which the young girl had given him in the first days of their romance, and which he had now displaced all the other portraits on the table. With a new sense of awe, he looked at the frank forehead, serious eyes, and gay, innocent mouth of the young creature whose sole custodian he was to be. That terrifying product of the social system he belonged to and believed in, the young girl who knew nothing and expected everything, looked back at him like a stranger through May Welland's familiar features. And once more it was born in on him that marriage was not the safe anchorage he had been taught to think, but a voyage on uncharted seas. Okay.
So now maybe there's a crack in his confidence.
There's a crack in his confidence. And I mean, what we're introduced to is obviously the crack has been helped along by good old Ellen, right?
Let me read very quickly to that, the next one, and we'll put those two together. Good. Because this is very short, but it does give me the only clue that I found of anything concrete going on between Ellen and Newland. This scene takes place when they're about to announce their engagement. And so they're at a large home, and guests are arriving, and May, the betrothed, is about to tell people, or she is telling people what's going on. Ellen is there, and she's talking to Newland. The drawing rooms were beginning to fill up with after-dinner guests, and following Madame Olenska's glance, Archer saw May Welland entering with her mother. In her dress of white and silver, with a wreath of silver blossoms in her hair, the tall girl looked like a Diana, just a light from the chase. "Oh," said Archer, "I have so many rivals. You see, she's already surrounded. There's the Duke being introduced." "Then stay with me a little longer," Madame Olenska said in a low tone, just touching his knee with her plumed fan. It was the lightest touch, but it thrilled him like a caress. "Yes, let me stay," he answered in the same tone, hardly knowing what he said. Something's going on here.
Something is going on here, and this is a significant conflict throughout the book. Because, like you just said, with the fan touching, a brush by, there's not really any depiction of any love-making.
Nothing untoward.
Nothing untoward.
This was in public.
A kiss, perhaps, at one point in time. I mean, it was a very brief moment. People who sit side by side and don't touch, but there's this energy going on. And we, of course, because it's Newland's eyes, we're looking at it all through, we feel the surging stuff going on him in the way he's portraying it. But this excitement, this fire, this energy, is consuming him, because he already knows, or he thinks he knows, what the option is. You know, it certainly isn't exciting to him. And I think we were talking earlier too that there's a moment where he sort of feels that perhaps in the first so many months or else this is going to be kind of fun and whatever have you with May, but he truly realizes that shortly thereafter it's going to be just like any other couple he may know.
And the problem seems to be a lack of real human connection. Everything seems to be the way it's supposed to be. And everything that's being done seems to be suddenly being done because that's the way it's supposed to be done.
Now, one of the things that comes out in this book, and I think we can jump to this point, one of the things that comes out is that May is not who or what she seems, at least as far as Newland has projected her, okay? In one commentary, she was, and I think unjustly labeled, as one of the prime villainesses in literature, okay, which I think is going really too far.
Absolutely.
But we're assuming
this was a first-rate author who said that.
Right. First-rate author who said that, and I guess we could have an argument to see exactly how it can be justified. But May has been stamped. May is what she, is, whatever, and all the while that we're introduced to her in the book, and she has an exchange with Newland, we don't get her thoughts. We get her how she talks to him and how she acts to him. So there's really, once again, very little clue that there could be something different lurking inside of her. And I guess the thing that she does that creates a significant change in the novel, speaks of the side that he would never know about. However, I think all things told, that she really is more of what she's been pictured as and thought of to be than something else. Am I making sense there?
No, it is. I think the thing that really gets people is that, and we weren't going to read anything about this, but she misleads Ellen into believing that she's pregnant before she knows she is, with the idea that if she tells Ellen Olenska that she's pregnant, then that means there can be no affair. There certainly can't be a running off.
And there can be no affair because it would be absolutely scandal in society. And Ellen already has scandal surrounding her. I mean, the idea that she would divorce her husband, okay, is already the buzz of the town. In fact, they're trying to convince her to go back to this man who we have to believe is not a nice guy. And Newland actually is introduced into this whole thing to persuade Ellen to, what? Not divorce her husband, right?
That's right, and this is one of the most ironic aspects of the book, because it's one of these almost theatrical, and you mentioned that it's somewhat of a theatrical novel, where there's a circle. So the first thing that happens is Newland convinces Ellen not to divorce, and that she should do what's right, and that taste is important. Then he tries to get her to run away with him. But she believed him the first time. So
and because of that, she wouldn't break.
Because of that, she wouldn't break. So in a way, you could say he protected himself in advance, but it's kind of ironic that the thing perpetuated itself. The other part about his wife, if she's going to make up something, possibly make up something in order to get her way, that's manipulative. But for someone to say that that makes her a villain, I mean, if I just think of Lady Macbeth, who asks her husband to murder the king, I mean, how can you compare somebody who's trying to keep their family together with someone trying to commit a murder and take over the kingdom?
And let's make it clear also that May, and this is probably another aspect of the fact that May isn't just, you know, an accepting, non-thinking wife, a dutiful wife. May already, and gives indication, already knows or suspects of his feelings for Ellen, okay? And a very interesting moment, at one point in time, before they get married, she actually gives him the opportunity to not go ahead with the marriage because he might be truly in love with someone else. And who she's talking about is not the man, not the woman who he's feeling these feelings for.
Right.
But, you know, she's perceptive enough, and I think considerate enough at that point in time, say, look, don't put yourself in this situation if you really want to follow your own heart. And this gives to his character as well, because he can't do it. Even given the chance, he can't do it.
And that aspect of May is something that we have to figure out as it goes along. There are clues. There's a couple paragraphs where the women are talking about the men, and they think that it's much worse for a woman to have an affair and be caught than for a man.
Of course.
Because after all, the men are hopeless. You know, they can't control themselves, while the women have to keep things going. So in a way, it's them who are stronger, and them who are working behind the scenes to keep things together.
Well, and of course, there are a couple men in the book who have had affairs and whose affairs are celebrated or talked about. And the whole notion is, though, is that it's like keeping secrets in a family. We can know about these things, but the real crime is if they go public, okay? Because then they have to throw you out. They have to disavow you. They have to run from you because they don't want to get tainted by this scandal. And so this whole notion of propriety, and that, as I said, May already has scandal attached to her, and, you know, to have the scandal of breaking up a marriage, having him run away with her,
It's too much.
too much, too much.
That kind of leads us back into another aspect of the culture, the society, and it paints a picture which is not very warm, which is not very fulfilling, and I think that's where Newland's major frictions are, trying to express himself and still live in this society. So the next section that I want to read takes it even further. Not only is it somewhat structured, it's downright abstract. In reality, they all lived in a kind of hieroglyphic world where the real thing was never said or done or even thought, but only represented by a set of arbitrary signs. As when Mrs. Welland, who knew exactly why Archer had pressed her to announce her daughter's engagement at Beaufort Ball, and had indeed expected him to do so no less, yet felt obliged to simulate reluctance. And the air of having had her hand forced, quite as in the books on primitive man that people of advanced culture were beginning to read, the savage bride is dragged with shrieks from her parents' tent. So not only could they not talk about what was going on freely and openly, they even made signals. They raised eyebrow. And it gave me the impression of, if I were coming in from another culture, I would have no idea
Absolutely not.
what was going on. I could have insulted the whole world. I wouldn't know it. And they could already be activating something, and I wouldn't know it. It would be like you think you speak the language and you don't.
You know, one of the things about Ellen also, not only did she have this sort of like stigma of being possibly divorcing her husband, but she had a European sensibility, and she didn't know the rules of the game, and she was seemingly forever misstepping, going to visit people that, gosh, you wouldn't visit. You know, a situation where they had to sort of contrive a social setting in order for people to accept her, because she was being said, oh my goodness, you know, we can't go near her, no matter who she's related to, because she's truly different. And she dressed differently, okay, how dare she? And when you get a little bit of a glimpse into where she lived and how she lived, you get these gaudy colors and a very bohemian quality to her, this sort of like sultry bohemian lady. So May certainly was a out of context person in their world. And so there's that conflict. And Archer, Newland's dilemma is that he loved this. It set him ablaze, and he wanted to break free because of all the things we've talked about before, and yet he was stuck. He was a captive in this particular societal structure. And we mused about, what if he had the whatever it takes to run off with her? He would have been totally shunned, probably disinherited, and would he have been able to exist?
Well, I think in terms of his mind, maybe not. But I still had hope, and I think he could have. I'm kind of an optimist, so I could say that.
You're a romantic too, Richard. Confess.
There is that, I confess. But I think the reason I can justify my hard yes, maybe I can say here, is that I think they matched really well. They were able to communicate about all these things. And as he discovered himself, as he discovered everybody knew what was going on except him, as he discovered that there were manipulations going on, he was able to talk to Ellen about it, where he couldn't talk to his wife. He couldn't talk to really anybody else. He would meet with a painter or something, because at least he could say whatever he wanted without shocking anyone. And so I think maybe there was a chance for them if they had gotten together to make a life.
I think so too. You know, if he was willing to break loose, and too bad he didn't have the whatever it takes. I don't know what you would call it, and he was consumed by this. I mean, there are moments when we read about him being in a place and everything that's going on around him, and he is just not there.
He's thinking about Ellen.
Totally concerned. And you know, because Ellen kind of comes and goes. There's a vaporous quality to her. we don't really know how much she was thinking about him.
Except, the optimist over here, she did cry with him and confesses in a way that she's felt the same way.
That's true.
And he kind of put her in the situation where she felt that the right thing to do was to preserve this family. And so she really, once she learned his lesson, she always had that hand out. Even when she broke down and embraced him, she ended up getting the hand back.
Yes, and what a beautiful, when they talk about the tears and being caught on the lashes and the veil and all that, absolutely beautiful. And we also mentioned, I think, a significant characteristic of Ellen that we really want to underscore, and that is that she was honest, okay? And
to a fault.
And honorable, okay? And we come to find out this totally because of what she does, okay? And, you know, may have been conniving and calculated in creating this situation because she knew, she played on her honesty,
right,
and her honorableness by telling her that she was pregnant, because Ellen then had no other choice but to disappear.
It's true.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I guess, you know, we're getting to where we've described a lot of the book. Do you think we should move on to near the end?
Well, I think.
Or do you want to do something?
Well, one of the things I wanted to bring out, and we'll show a picture of this also, because I think it's significant to the way people acted and the way people felt. There's a play that's referred to, and it's sort of like what happens or what's happening with Archer and Ellen, called The Shoreham, where we have the last scene of this play. It's a very well-known play, and people, I presume, memorize it. And every time they saw it, they were just captured by this ending. And I believe it's an officer in the military,
yeah, I'm glad
right?
we're doing, yeah.
And he's leaving his beloved, or the woman he loves. And there's a moment at the very end of the play where she is back to him. He's going to be leaving. She is back to him, and he's about to leave, and he turns around, and she has a ribbon that's hanging down her back. And in a very cavalier kind of way, gesture, no word said at all, he goes up to the ribbon, and presumably unbeknownst to her, he picks it up and kisses it, okay? And then he leaves, okay? And that's when the curtain falls. And, you know, people in the audience are like tears pouring down their face, and because of whatever they're putting into it. And it's so significant about what goes on between Archer and Ellen, okay? And we do actually have a moment where we are brought back to that stage picture when Ellen all of a sudden is in a place where he wasn't expecting her after a period of time. Okay?
Great.
And of course, upon hearing the fact that Ellen is there, he's like, whoa, you know, and he's been asked, conveniently so, he's been asked to go fetch her, okay? And he goes over hill and dale, whatever have you, and he sees her, and much the same way as this picture that I've just described. And he approaches her, and her back is to him, and instead of going up and kissing the ribbon, so to speak, or letting himself know that he's there, he decides to wait for her to acknowledge him. It's like, well, if she does this, then I'll do that.
Right.
And she stays put, and she doesn't turn around. And this moment of great joy and how he's been propelled, he turns around and he goes away. Not a word is said. Okay? And we come to find out later that she knew he was there, okay? And probably would have loved the fact if he would be free enough to go up to her and embrace her. And
they were both playing the same game.
They were both playing the same game, okay? Just a wonderful moment, you know, and how that's a through line there, this idea of not touching, not saying, just marvelous, so.
Before also you get to that last thing, there's something that would also go the opposite way from my optimism that I
Uh-oh.
blithely put out a few moments ago. And this passage makes it seem maybe they wouldn't have ever gotten together. This is Ellen speaking. Is it your idea then that I should live with you as your mistress, since I can't be your wife, she asked. And he says, I want somehow to get away with you into a world where words like that, categories like that won't exist, where we shall be simply two human beings who love each other, who are the whole of life to each other, and nothing else on earth will matter. She drew a deep sigh that ended in another laugh. Oh, my dear, where is that country? Have you ever been there, she asked, and as he remained silently dumb, she went on, I know so many who've tried to find it, and believe me, they all got out by mistake at wayside stations, at places like Boulogne, Pisa, or Monte Carlo. And it wasn't at all different from the old world they'd left, but only rather smaller and dingier and more promiscuous.
Significant. Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that happens often, and you talk about, these missed moments, when in Romeo and Juliet, the horseman passes, and you go, no, stop, kind of thing. There's several instances in this book where Archer has created a situation. He's going to go see May. Okay, I mean,
Boston,
to see
Washington,
Ellen.
whatever.
He's going to go see Ellen. He's made a decision. He's lied, in fact. Okay, and he's going to do that, and all of a sudden, as he's going to go there, she's going to come here. Okay, or he's been asked to meet her, and he's getting all worked up and all excited because he's going to be alone with her, and he gets to her home, and there are people there. Okay, so there are these moments where it just isn't going to happen. Over and over again, there's this frustration. It's like, and at one point in time, I was thinking, because of some of the characters, is this contrived? Because unfortunately, I was swayed because I had heard this commentary about her character, May's character, early on. So I was looking for this little evil thing. So I was thinking that there might have been more manipulation and contrivance, and that she created this, and then more by happenstance. And there's also several times, when Newland Archer wants to tell May. He can't stand it, okay? And he gets to the point of he's created the scene, it's all what's on his mind, and he starts to say something, and she throws him off kilter, okay? She just, one of the times is when she tells him she's pregnant, which stops him dead.
Absolutely.
Okay, but there's a couple other times. And there's this feeling of, and I mentioned this before, this feeling of suffocation. There's a wonderful passage where he's with May and he wants to tell her, okay, and the whole image of open the windows, okay, I need the windows open, it's hot in here, I can't breathe.
Remember that.
And this whole image of, I need to be free, open the windows. Couldn't do it. Even if the real windows were open,
Couldn't do it.
It was closed. Couldn't do it. Really shut off. And I guess this is where people get frustrated with this character, because they want him to be what? More of a man or whatever have you, and step out of this nonsense and do it. But he was trapped. He couldn't.
Well, it is frustrating to see somebody balance between two things. You would think, okay, renounce once and for all, and go back and live life the way you think you should. Or if you're going to suffer for 40 years, today most people would say, my gosh, get a divorce. I mean, you're not even here. You don't even know what's going on in the house. You're so out of it because you're dreaming about something else. Is this a life for everybody else? So times have changed, though.
For sure as hell, it was okay for her, though.
Right.
Even though she knew, and she knew how to keep him put.
Well, I think that's important, that he was emoting. And then he was surprised that anybody knew what was going on.
Well, there's this wonderful scene. I think it's one of the more brilliant scenes in the whole piece, where there's a dinner, isn't it the dinner that they're holding for Ellen because she's going back to Europe?
Party.
It's her goodbye party, and it's the moment where he's in a space, and he's witnessing what's happening, but his mind is realizing what's truly happening. And it starts out by saying, the talk swept past Archer like some senseless river, running and running because it did not know enough to stop. And all this stuff is swirling around him, and he realizes and knows absolutely that everybody knows. Okay? Knows what? He never really did anything.
But they think he did.
They think he did, and that's about as bad, or maybe it's worse. And he's realizing that, my God, I'm not fooling anybody. They all know how I feel about her. And it's an incredible scene of this stuff swirling around, life happening as your mind is sort of working this whole revelation. And it ends, that's why I thought it was wonderful. It starts out, it gives the whole picture of it, and once again it ends. And so the evening swept on, running and running like a senseless river that did not know how to stop.
No, that's a beautiful line.
It just, wow. Wow. So, okay, I think we can come to the one of the things that happens in this book, and it actually could end at this particular point in time, but we have the final chapter, which takes place how many years later?
20-something.
20-something years later, okay? And I think it's absolutely necessary, although some people say, yeah, the book could have ended back then, okay? Ellen's gone, he's doing this life, and we find out he's had children.
He's been I don't know if it was an assemblyman
He's
or
gone
a
into
senator,
politics,
but
absolutely.
one term only.
Absolutely. And he's in Paris with his son, okay? And while they're there, the son, who is very much like him, I guess, in appearance and perhaps in demeanor, finds out that Ellen Olenska is in Paris also. And he agrees to having a meeting with her. I guess it might be a dinner later in the day. And they were going to go to Versailles and travel. But upon hearing that, it starts, and I think this is one of those other stunners too. Archer did not accompany his son to Versailles. He preferred to spend the afternoon in solitary roamings through Paris. He had to deal all at once with the packed regrets and stifled memories of an inarticulate lifetime. Chokes me up. It's that everything brought back here. Here he is, that much older. Ellen's not been in his life. And there he is, once again, given the opportunity to be with her one more time. Okay.
And to imagine what would go through the man's mind, that rather than immediately think about what could be, think about all the time that it wasn't. So it's kind of the reverse of what we learned about him in the beginning, that he thought about things and he enjoyed them in thinking about them. He thought about the wonders of the opera and thought about how wonderful it would be, and that was his enjoyment. And now instead it's in reverse. He's rethinking over all those years that he probably just marched through, and he's suddenly realizing, I'm on a border here. I can go, or maybe a fork in the road is better, and I can go one way or the other.
Didn't expect it, totally unexpected. And for all practical purposes, we're led to believe that his life has been okay.
Okay.
And I especially think with the children, nothing untoward, as you say. He's been in politics. He's well known. He's highly regarded. Successful life. Okay. And somewhere, I'm sure, in this journey, he has put this past.
But faced with the dreams of the past, they unpacked themselves, I guess.
Talk about a convergent. Talk about a convergence. Talk about a moment in time. I mean, really, to have him just stopped right then and there. And why don't we? I don't think we're because we've led up to this point. Why don't we both share the end of the book? Because I think it's very significant. And we get to that point in time where at that point in time of the day where he and his son go to her apartment, okay? And he looks at the apartment and he's sort of like wondering what floor, or the son actually is wondering what floor she's on. And he goes, oh, it must be the 5th floor. It must be the one with the awnings. And Archer remained motionless, gazing at the upper windows as if the end of their pilgrimage had been attained. I say, you know, it's nearly 6, his son at length reminded him. The father glanced away at an empty bench under the trees. I believe I'll sit here for a moment, he said. Why, aren't you well? His son exclaimed. Oh, perfectly. But I should like you, please, to go up without me. Dallas paused before him, visibly bewildered. But I say, Dad, do you mean you won't come up at all? I don't know, said Archer slowly. If you don't, she won't understand. Go, my boy, perhaps I shall follow you. Dallas gave him a long look through the twilight. But what on earth shall I say? My dear fellow, don't you always know what to say? His father rejoined with a smile. Very well, I shall say you're old-fashioned and prefer walking up the 5 flights because you don't like lifts. His father smiled again. Say I'm old-fashioned. That's enough. And Dallas looked at him again and then, with an incredulous gesture, passed out of sight under the vaulted doorway.
Archer sat down on the bench and continued to gaze at the awninged balcony. He calculated the time it would take his son to be carried up in the lift to the 5th floor, to ring the bell and be admitted to the hall, and then ushered into the drawing room. He pictured Dallas entering that room with his quick, assured step and his delightful smile, and wondered if the people were right who said that his boy took after him. Then he tried to see the persons already in the room. For probably at that sociable hour there would be more than one, and amongst them a dark lady, pale and dark, who would look up quickly, half rise, and hold out a long, thin hand with 3 rings on it. He thought she would be sitting in a sofa corner near the fire with azaleas banked behind her on a table. It's more real to me here than if I went up, he heard suddenly himself say. And the fear, lest that last shadow of reality should lose its edge, kept him rooted to his seats as the minutes succeeded each other. He sat for a long time on the bench in the thickening dusk, his eyes never turning from the balcony. At length, a light shone through the windows, and a moment later a manservant came out on the balcony, drew up the awnings, and closed the shutters. At that, as if it had been the signal he waited for, Newland Archer got up slowly and walked back alone to his hotel. End.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And, clearly the dream had sustained him, and reality, although endurable, would in effect, like she said before, there is not that country. There is not that place. And so at a very beautiful moment, he decides to keep it in himself and in his dream.
I think we got about to the same place. We decided we weren't going to discuss that last sentence, but I think I came to the same conclusion.
Well, and I don't think, as I say, because one of the things you also mentioned is that this book begs, I think, multiple readings. And I would suggest that anybody who read it long ago, pick it up again and read it again, because it's got so much to it. And I found that, even when we were having a discussion the other night, I found that as we were discussing, all sorts of thoughts were coming up. And I hadn't had them until we were in a medium where people were asking questions and making suppositions about what was happening, whatever have you, which there are no answers, only suppositions. And so I think what it does is it's so personal to me, this book is so personal, that you really owe it to yourself to read it again or read it for the first time. And I don't think we've spoiled anything at all because, you know, between all those passages, between the beginning and the end, there's so much there. You really need to be introduced to these people, you know, and also see how it relates to you. I think this woman just did it all. As I said before, I was not inclined to be an Edith Wharton fan, but I sure am now. And I invite everybody to take the same journey.
I think that makes a nice ending.
Yes. And I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us again for yet another edition of Talking About Books. And maybe we'll do it again sooner, but let's hope that we can do it again next year.
At least next year.
Okay.
Great.
And until then, have a good one.